Meeting. We'll call the meeting to order. First up is the approval of the minutes from the February 27th, 2023 regular meeting. Commissioners, any corrections, additions? None? Okay. We'll go ahead and consider those to be approved. All right. And next up is our one of two public hearings. First one is City of Hastings, amend the City Code, Chapter 155, Solar Energy Systems. Staff report by John Hinsman. John?
I got ahead of myself. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Planning Commissioner. So tonight we've got an amendment to our city code, the zoning ordinance, Chapter 155, to establish solar energy system rules. At present, we do not have any rules pertaining to solar energy systems, which are your typical solar panels or other facilities, which I'll get into in a moment. We've handled those through building permits, which have been fine for local systems. However, we have been approached by individuals that have been wanting to do solar farms, which is a larger type of use. And we didn't really have any direction on that. So we put together rules for solar energy systems. These rules pertain to residential use as well as the solar farm use, and I'll get into some of the details here in a moment. So when we look at the type of systems, here's what we're looking at here. We've got roof-mounted systems, which I'm sure you're familiar with. These are on either people's residential homes or they can be on larger businesses and larger buildings themselves. They can have wall-mounted systems, which showed here. These are typically not really much on residential, but more on larger commercial institutional buildings. You've got ground-mounted, which are not located within a structure itself, but located on its own structure within a piece of property. And then as you expand that further, you've got your ground-mounted solar farms and gardens. So these are typically a primary use of a property. As you can see here, very larger acreage that go on, and typically energy is produced, given back to a co-op or energy provider to offset. So that is the type of systems that we're looking at here. So with the rules that we have established here, they go into varying degrees. So if you've got a solar system under 6 square feet, there's nothing needed. You can do them any place, no permits needed, no performance standards, just go ahead and do it. So we're not gonna have small little panels that may, for lights or for other things that work. For wall-mounted systems, they're also allowed in all districts with a building permit. We do put some performance standards in there to limit visibility to the right-of-way, want to integrate them into the building design and comply with the minimum setbacks. So that really wouldn't change much from what we have today through the issuance of a building permit. Roof-mounted, individual use is similar to that. We have rules that would say it would be flush to the roof. It could only be angled if the flush is not feasible. It would have to meet the height requirements established in the district with a limited view from right-of-way. And with all of these, there'd be a limitation of glare to the neighbors on this as well. Another category we have is roof-mounted solar gardens. So this would be a system where you'd have a large institutional building, for example, and you would have solar arrays on top of those. The way that the rules would be is that these could be allowed on flat roofs with a building permit, and many of the same requirements we've had as above. There would be a decommissioning plan established with this one, as well as some of the other ones. The decommissioning plan establishes rules for, okay, there's a certain lifetime period for this type of panel or this type of garden, and once that is over with, there's plans in place for you to decommission it, to remove it, and to put the area back to where it was when it was pre-development. We have ground-mounted solar systems as an accessory use. These are kind of smaller units similar to this. Those you could do in all districts if the property is more than 5 acres. So that is a delimiter. We don't have a lot of properties that are over 5 acres within this city. Certainly most residential properties would not be eligible for that, but some commercial institutional properties, ag properties would be. We established some height provisions on there and setback standards and prohibition in the front yard. And then we have the ground-mounted solar garden. This is where we spend some of the most time on it because this is really the meat of what we wanted to establish here. The way that we have presented the ground-mounted solar gardens is that they're only allowed within the agricultural district if you have over 5 acres, and they would be with an interim use permit. Now, what an interim use permit is it's like a special use permit, but it's for a defined period of time. So we could establish this for usually 20 years or 25 years is a typical length of time for a solar contract. And after that period of time, there'd be an agreement signed. After that period of time, certain provisions for turning it back to what it once was. There would be setback requirements, screening and buffering, requirements for underground connections, stormwater management, and a decommissioning plan with that as well. So that's kind of how the regulations would work. I characterize that most of this chart here is little change to what we're doing right now. It requires just a building permit. We don't have a solar building permit, but we have an electrical or other building permit that we review. Some of the performance standards are a little bit different that we have today, but not terribly different than what we have presently. I think where the meat of the ordinance comes here is really with that community solar garden, since we don't really have anything like that at present. The other portions of the ordinance that we are amending would be in providing what a definition would be for an interim use under our zoning code. This is a temporary use until a particular date, until the occurrence of a particular event, or until zoning regulations no longer permit it. So we didn't have a definition for interim use, so I thought it would be good to put one in there. The other language that we're amending is under the agricultural district itself, interim uses. At present, we have one interim use that is allowed within the agricultural district, and that's pertaining to a waiver of site plan requirements. This has been used by United Heroes League and by Extreme Sandbox to do improvements for a period of time that don't meet our minimum site plan requirements, typically a paved parking lot or a permanent building, but there'd be a date certain, usually 18 months, that those improvements would need to be made. So we modified that section to include two different types of interim uses, one for what we presently have in there, which is the waiver of site plan requirements, and the other one for the ground-mounted solar gardens. In amending that code, the only change we made to the interim use waiver was taking out the limitation of 18 months in that permit. The rationale was that we're going to have an interim use agreement with each one of these uses, and we can establish a time frame that meets that we wouldn't necessarily regulate a certain amount of time for that. So those are the amendments that we have before you tonight. These are all to Chapter 155. What you're asked to do is to hold a public hearing to consider the changes of this, and then discuss any changes and make a recommendation to the City Council. So I can stand for any questions. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, John. We'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Do we have anybody on Zoom?
No, do not.
Okay, nobody on Zoom, nobody present here, so we'll open the public hearing, and we'll close the public hearing. There we go. Open it up to commissioners for questions. If none, I have a question real quick. For the all systems under 6 feet, 6 square feet. So, and then you go down and it defines it a little bit further under applicability, under general standards.
Yep.
What's to prevent somebody from doing a 6 square foot section here and then moving over a few feet and doing another 6 foot section, still under the 6 square feet? It says cumulative area, but it doesn't define what cumulative means. Does that mean they're all connected to the same source? Are they being used for the same output on the same? That's what I'm trying to figure out, is there's a loophole there. So what's to prevent, 5, 6, under 6 square foot sections from being connected together in a certain area, which would keep it under the don't need a permit?
Sure.
So that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I understand your question there, Mr. Chair. Looking at that, the cumulative, in my interpretation, if they're connected to the same, not power source, but the same charging source on that one, I would count that as one. If they're distinct things that aren't connected to the same source, then they would be separate. That's the way I would make that interpretation.
Okay, would it be possible to modify that to say exactly what you just said?
Sure.
And put that into the Let's see what my other commissioners think about that. Put that into that paragraph so that it specifically defines the source and the charging source, the output and input, so that we eliminate that loophole, that potential loophole. Because if you put up a 5-foot one now, then you come back in 6 months and you go, well, I'm gonna do another 5-foot, and according to the city ordinance, I don't need a permit for that one either. And then you come back in 6 more months and you stick another 5-square-foot one up. Now you've got, 15. Now you're into a bigger system, but yet you still were under the 6-square-foot
Okay,
rule. If that makes any sense.
all right, got it.
That's kind of where I was on that one, so.
Okay,
So I'd make a recommendation to include the language about the charging source, output, input that we just discussed.
okay.
Make that change. Okay, thanks. Commissioner Tyken?
To that point, could we just add language like 6 square feet per lot?
Per,
Yeah, I feel like that's
6
less
square feet per what?
messy.
Per lot?
Per lot, okay, thanks.
Then it just, anything over, once you break the 6 foot, you have to get a building permit.
Okay,
You okay with that, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, does the same thing. Yep, perfect.
okay.
Yep. Commissioners, any other comments, questions?
There was one thing that I noticed in reading through this earlier. So on the roof mounted, one of the first things I thought, just looking at the grid, when I first opened this up the other day, was the limit view from public right of way. I would just hate to, some people's property, like mine, for instance, the system just wouldn't work quite right because the directionality of it was so that, the optimal placement of the solar would be visible from the right of way, right? So I like the provision under the roof-mounted energy system, number 4, provided that minimizing visibility still allows the property owner to reasonably capture solar energy. I was wondering if we could also add just a little caveat to the wall-mounted as well, similar.
Okay,
Yeah, I understand, the thrust of why we would want to limit visibility from the public right-of-way, but I also wouldn't want to limit somebody's ability to have a functional or, a system that breaks even eventually, basically, or gives them what they're expecting because of that, just because of the way their property's oriented to the right-of-way. So,
okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think as I was reading through this, I know sometimes solar panels are grant funded in certain ways, like there's different entities that will do grant. Is there anything that we want to put in terms of language, especially as I think of decommissioning, anything explicit in terms of who's responsible for that, whether it's the property owner or the grantee, the granting organization? Just something for consideration so we don't find ourselves debating who's responsible.
Okay. Yeah, Commissioner, when I'm looking at the decommissioning, my intent was that the owner would be responsible for the decommissioning plan and its responsibilities, and that we would obligate them with a interim use permit agreement. I'm looking through this to see if there's anything more on this one, but I could add some language on there pertaining to owner responsibility on that one for decommissioning.
It does say in number 4 to require the owner and/or operator. Would that cover both?
I think so. Yeah, for the city may at its discretion require the owner and/or operator of the solar energy system to provide financial security in the form of an escrow or revocable letter of credit. So there's a financial obligation for the owner operator under 4 there, so maybe that covers it. Okay.
I do like that suggestion because, yeah, you want to pinpoint who the responsible party is, especially if there's more than one party involved in the construction of it initially. So that's good. That's a very good point. Commissioner Peters?
Yeah, my main question that I had when looking at this is, For structures and homes and things like that that might already have solar panels in place, they wouldn't have to go through and do building permits because it's already on there. They're grandfathered in. Okay. And then in the meantime, I don't know how long it would take if the city council would vote on this at the next meeting and then it would be in place. But what does it mean for anyone who would want to be putting in solar panels in, like, kind of in this little interim period between, once it's introduced here, will the city council act on it right away?
Sure.
Okay.
Answer that question, Commissioner. With existing solar energy systems that are in place, they would be grandfathered in, so there would not be any retrofits necessary to meet any ordinance requirement on this. If they were to go through and do a major change to that system, then they'd be applicable at that point. What we've done in the past with solar energy systems, and these have been on people's homes, it's a building permit, so it would continue to be a building permit. As far as what happens between now and the adoption of the code, they would still be going in for a building permit. The regulations that would come in place here be more for some of the height requirements and some of the more visual aesthetic things in the glare, which don't have in there right now. Some of the other distance requirements like height are in there already, so there shouldn't be too much of a change in that one. At this point right now, if the commission were to take action tonight on this one, there'd be a first and second reading by the council taking place on April 3rd and then April 17th. So the 17th would be the final adoption date if all was to go forward.
All right. Commissioner McGrath?
One more question. In the angled, only if flush is not feasible, not having installed a lot of solar panels, is it easy to make a determination if something is feasible in terms of whether it can be flush or angle mounted?
Yeah, with that one, we would look at the designer of the solar energy system to say, if they're coming in with an angle, say, well, why can't this be flush? And to really have them tell us why it can't be. And so I've left it intentionally open so we didn't have a hard requirement on that. We wrangled back and forth a lot of it internally with staff as far as what we wanted to do, but we left it a little bit open so we could make those determinations.
Good, thank you. Commissioner
Thank
Palmer, go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chair. John, under 4 additional requirements, letter C, it says applications for solar energy systems. All solar energy systems require a building permit and must include the following information: a site plan of existing and proposed site conditions. I just want clarification because you'd said anything under 6 feet wouldn't require any kind of a permit.
Correct, yep, that's, the way that this is handled in here, anything under 6 feet would be exempt from anything that would be within this code here. So when we're taking a look at the general standards, the applicability exempts everything, and then when we go to the additional requirements, it's implied that this would not be applicable.
I just didn't know if the implication followed or if there needed to be language in there as well repeating it.
Yeah.
I was just looking for clarification.
Okay. Yeah, I think the way it's stated right now, it's clear to me that this would be not applicable for under 6.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Okay, good, thank you. Commissioner Tyken?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What do we mean, I think I know what we mean, but what do we mean by flush to roof? Because flush to me means the same height.
Yeah.
And I think what we really mean is the same angle as the roof, right?
Right. Flush to me would be 2 things. One would be at the same angle of the roof and as close to the roof physically as possible. And I believe that there's some systems in which there's a racking mechanism where there's a separation for water to run down there, so it's not exactly, the panel itself is not attached fully, but the main portion of the structure is not attached directly to the roof. There's a bracket in between there. So when I'm looking at that, I'm looking at the angle of it and being close to the roof line.
Okay.
In my mind.
And so, to me, the big part about here, this thing is the solar gardens and the solar farms. How many lots do we have in the city that could potentially put something like this up?
Commissioner, not much. I mean, in the ag district that we have within the city, is primarily located along County Road 15 and Glendale Road, that area, or 54 and Glendale Road. That would really be the area within the city limits. When you look to the west, there isn't any ag land within the city, nor to the south. All the ag land there would be within unincorporated township areas. So the applicability of this is probably pretty limited, but we did have individuals that were looking at that area about 3-4 months ago.
Okay. And then if we acquired land that had a solar garden on it, what would that look like for those landowners?
If we acquired land that had a solar garden on it, it would be a good question. We would have them come in for an interim use permit if it's a zoned in ag district, enter into an interim use permit agreement for that. The question that would really come before us is, what would be the purpose for us doing that? If it's a situation where a solar garden, it's towards its usable life, for example, 20 years down the road, it's a 25-year contract and we're on year 22 and the owner is looking at future residential development, well then, we could look at that at a very, very smaller time period. I think, from future decisions the council might have, I don't know what the advantages would be for us to incorporate that, an existing solar garden, unless there was a development imminent within it.
Well, I was just thinking, like, if they put one right next to the city and then we started expanding
sure.
outside of that solar garden area, what
Yeah.
that would look like. I was just curious. Otherwise, I think it's great and we should promote it, solar energy as much as we can, so thank you for doing this.
Sure.
And before we make a motion, I'd like to hear what we propose for changes again. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Sure. I think the first proposal was under general regulations. Well, actually, we're going to address the 6 square foot under the applicability. So general standards 3A to include language per lot. Correct. That's what we agreed on was
Yep.
per lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second recommendation was to exempt the 6 square foot, but John, I think you explained that one, that you interpret that as being all systems except for what we already said would be not included. So I think that's okay there. Commissioners, am I forgetting any other?
Yeah.
I think that was the only recommendation.
Yeah, what I've got down here so far, and correct me if I'm wrong here, was the per lot, under the applicability section on 3A, that we specify that's per lot, that we put a modification in that same section that defines cumulative better, that if it's a system that's connected to the same output, that's connected, and if it's not within the same system, that's individual. Put some better worded language than that within there. Under 3C4, when we're talking about roof-mounted, that reasonably capture of solar energy and some of those other phrasing in here, we would also include those within 3B, the wall-mounted. I think Commissioner LeBrun had suggested that, and that might be it as far as what I have, unless, we'll go back here. I got more pages. Under the decommissioning, which is on page 7, that we make some specification on owner's responsibility and existing solar. Oh, that was just a comment I made. That's what I have, unless I've missed something.
Nope, that's what I have.
Okay.
So, there we go. Commissioner Braun.
Yeah, just one more question. Just thinking on the ground-mounted accessory use, so the 5 acres. I'm just thinking hypothetically, so say I had an accessory shed, right, or some other accessory structure. If I wanted to do roof-mounted on that, I could, under this ordinance, right, with the building permit? What if we just removed the structure and it was a solar panel of similar, size to an accessory use on a, say, residential parcel, if somebody has like a larger parcel? I guess it's mostly just the 5 acres. I just wonder if, I don't know how common it would be, but I don't know if I care either way, you know, if there's a shed or a pergola or a structure underneath it or not, if there's a solar panel instead, if that makes sense. You kind of follow? So I just wonder if, you know, where the 5 acres came from on the ground-mounted accessory use. Because I believe there's, you know, lot coverage, setbacks, things about accessory structures. And if we incorporated that in there, if we could just fold that rather than disallow completely.
Yeah, my rationale for it is, when you're taking a look in a residential scenario on something that's, you know, under an acre or so, when you've got a structure for, just a ground-mounted structure itself, I don't know how well it fits into the residential character of the neighborhood, frankly. I mean, if it's integrated within another structure, on top of it, great. But when it's a standalone system, it's a little bit different looking. So it really, I came at it primarily from an aesthetic standpoint, that is this really something that we want to see standalone? Certainly want to encourage solar energy systems, but the standalone there, I just wasn't too crazy about from an aesthetic standpoint. That's where I was coming from.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. Commissioner Tyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just thought of this when you were talking about, would we allow the city to put solar panels in a park? Under
Now,
this
let's see,
ordinance?
if the park is zoned if it's on a structure, you could, yes, like I say, a warming house, you could do that. If it was a ground-mounted system on a park over 5 acres, you could, that'd be some of our regional parks. If a park is zoned agriculture, and there might be a few that are, that could provide for a solar energy garden if we wanted to do that, so possibly.
I mean, I live across the street from a large park. I'm sure it's more than 5 acres. I'm pretty much guarantee it's bigger than 5 acres. Is that something we want the city, I'm looking at my fellow commissioners here, is that something we allow the city to do or not do?
Do you mean, do we want the city to go into the solar energy business? Is that what we're kind of looking at? Because I can't remember.
I'm not saying they're going to solar business, but maybe there's a need or just a community action to provide solar, and so the city wants to kind of step up to the plate and show how it can be done. I'm just throwing it out there, like, there's large tracts of land in the city that the city owns
Yeah.
that they could put up, I'm not saying put up a, 5 kilowatt solar garden, but maybe it's something on smaller scale or provides power for a well pump house or something like that. We don't have to change this, but I'm just saying, I'm just throwing this out there, like, could we see where the city, we'd want the city to do something like that?
Wouldn't that come before us at some point in time? And
If it's, yeah, there's kind of two instances that I see. If it is a ground-mounted solar garden, for example, be an interim use permit, public hearing, reviewed and conditions set, and determination at that point, is this something we want to allow or not? The one where it doesn't come in would be if you had a property over 5 acres and you've got a ground-mounted solar system. You could theoretically put those in with a building permit. I guess the question would come up from the parks aspect is, usually the 5-acre park areas are pretty highly programmed, and if you're putting in solar panels, does it detract from the use of that for a recreational facility? So I don't know how common that would be, but it could.
I live across the street from one that's pretty much a big open grassland with a
Yeah.
couple trails through it, so nothing else happens on that besides me
Okay.
walking my dog through the grass.
Yeah,
And a bunch of ducks and coyotes and other stuff.
yeah.
So I'm just like, could the city put in a big solar garden there? Or
Sure.
do we want the city to do that, or? So that's why I threw it out there, kind of selfish on my part. And I'm not saying I'm for or against it, I'm just, was curious.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, that's good food for thought.
Yeah. So,
Absolutely. Commissioner Hubbard, did you have your light on, or, nope? I just don't see the city putting it up in the parks. There's no really where to power, nothing to really power except maybe
I'm
some
just
lights.
throwing it out
I mean,
there.
I'm thinking of myself
Well,
too. I
there's
was like,
literally nothing in that park, I
you got
agree,
lights
but
and maybe that's about it, but they're all.
sometimes we look to the government to kind of pave the
Yeah.
path on doing things.
And I'm trying to figure out too, and I'm stretching on this one, commissioners, because I'm probably speaking stuff I don't know a lot about, but when you look at the public dedication of a parkland may preclude that from occurring anyway, because it's being dedicated for a specific purpose, which is for open space or recreation. If you're using that for an income-related thing, I don't know if that'd be consistent with the use of parkland. So it may be a moot point, but I'm not certain of that.
Okay. Again, I'm not looking for changes, I just threw it out there as
If it would-
food for thought.
If it would support the activity. Would it, I mean, if it could support the activity that's going on there, I guess my thought went right away to like up at Vets, where there's a lot of electricity that's used up there to power all the lights and the buildings and stuff. You know, if there were solar panels up there to help power some of those things, then it's not a profit being used from it. It's just showing like, oh, this is how it could be used. So I could see something working there, but, or that could be a situation where it could come up. But then what I'm hearing you say is that that could come before, even how this is defined, that could still come before us as an interim use or a special use permit or something.
If it's a larger solar garden, if there's a third party out, well, I'll go back on that one, because the primary use is still going to be a park on that one. This would be an accessory use that would happen on this. I think it'd really be a decision that would come before the Parks Commission and the City Council more than anybody else at this point. Because really, when you look at the solar gardens, that's a primary use of property. Primary use of the property is still going to remain a park. So it wouldn't fall under a solar garden interim use permit because it's not the primary use. So I think it'd really be if they were to do that and say, hey, we want to lease a portion of a park for solar panels on that one, it would be under zoning, a building permit, if it's over 5 acres, and anything that happens in a parkland would be reviewed by the Parks and Recreation Commission and ultimately approved by the City Council. That's how I think that one would run.
Over at the transportation shops, they do have solar. We have well, actually, we have solar right in our parking lot at work. We have a huge solar structure, and then the transportation shops have a huge solar structure on the south side. And they take up a lot of room. I mean, there's a lot of infrastructure that goes into building one of those. And so it would definitely change the look of the park completely. I mean, it would totally change everything about it. You can't just put them in there and, you know, it's interesting to watch that go in. It's not a small feat, that's for sure.
No.
So, good discussion. They could just put one in right now if they wanted to, because we don't even have an ordinance on the books.
You don't have anything right now.
So right now, actually, if anything, we're,
As a
if
crew
anything,
working right now.
we're restricting, actually.
Yep.
You know, we're actually restricting the city from really going forward with any kind of solar farms, because right now, there's nothing to prevent them from doing it. So this is actually, you know, a good thing for everybody, you know, so. Yeah. Commissioners, any other questions, comments? If not, I'll take a motion if we're ready at that point. Commissioner Halbert?
Mr. Chair, I'll make the motion to approve the amending of City Code Chapter 155, Solar Energy Systems,
And do you want to incorporate those
with the
changes?
incorporation of the changes as discussed.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Commissioner Tyken, second. Yeah, any new discussion? All right, if none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries.
Thank
All
you.
right, thanks, John,
And then
for
with
that
this
one.
recommendation, it'll move forward to the City Council. April 3rd would be first reading on the consent agenda. And then the second reading and action would take place on April 17th.
April 17th.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. Next is another public hearing for amending City Code Chapter 155 for escrows and fees. And again, John Hinsman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Planning Commissioners. So today it's a little little confusing on this one, and I know there was a revised document sent out as well, but we are looking to establish better rules on escrows and fees as they relate to Chapter 154, which is the subdivision code, and Chapter 155, which is the zoning code. With officially tonight with the public hearing notice that went out for Planning Commission only referenced the change to Chapter 155. So officially, we're holding the public hearing for that. But since both changes are identical to both codes, and the Planning Commission has purview over review of both of those, we'll look at both of those tonight. In discussing that with the city attorney, we're able to hold the public hearing for the subdivision code with the second reading there. So bottom line is there'll be two public hearings, two bites at the apple from Planning Commission and City Council relating to these two codes. So really, what are we looking to do here? One of the things is within both the zoning code and the subdivision code, we have specified fees within there. Those fees that we have within there are frankly out of date. We haven't kept up with those. All the fees that we have within the city are kept under one place, which is Chapter 3403. So we would just eliminate the fees there. We'd make reference to say, hey, if you're looking for the fees are within the fee schedule, which is 3403. That way we're only updating one piece. So that's the easiest thing that we're doing out of this. The other is to establish more specific requirements for escrows. Now, in discussion with the city attorney, our escrows right now are listed within the city code, and it doesn't give any clear direction as to our ability as a city to collect more money if an escrow account becomes deficient. The escrows are established in addition to the plan application fee in order to defray some of the cost we have. So with larger projects like site plans and subdivisions, we may have outside engineering look at that. We may have attorneys look at that for agreement. We want to be able to have the developer pay the direct costs associated with the review, and to do this, we establish an escrow. Because each of these developments is difficult to gauge how much they're going to ultimately cost, we establish that escrow and draw from it. Any escrow funds that remain at the end of the project would be remitted back to the applicant. That remains on there. So what we're doing with this one is we are establishing a few provisions. One, where we're more clearly identifying what these expenses would be paid for, consultants, attorneys, planning, engineering fees, other expenses due to the application. We're also stating that the balance of the cash escrow, if it's depleted less than 10%, they shall deposit additional funds. So there's a key that this is not a set fee, but when the escrow funds becomes depleted, the developer is obligated to replenish them. We've had some legal issues in other cities in which these were not clearly defined, and the cities were unable to collect additional escrows because it was a singular fee that was established. We want to prevent that from occurring. We're obligation by the city to pay back those escrows upon the end of the period itself when the project is over. So that's what we're doing. The other actions that are within both these, and I should say that Chapter 154, 155, the regulations are identical in it, are taking into consideration, are also putting the existing language that's in there generally within the code. That does not change. What we are changing is that escrow payment provision. So a little bit confusing, but that's what we're doing here tonight on that one. So again, asking the Planning Commission to hold the public hearing to amend Chapter 155 tonight, and then I can stand for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. I'll ask one more time. Anybody on Zoom?
Nope.
Nobody Zoom? Okay, so we'll open the public hearing, and we'll close the public hearing, since we have nobody on Zoom and nobody present here to speak. And we'll go open it up for commissioners with questions. Just if I read this correct, if I think about a mortgage, and you know, when you escrow your taxes, when you agree that the mortgage company can adjust your escrows every year. If your taxes go up, they pull more money, they increase your payment. It's essentially what you're doing here is saying, if the costs go up, the developer has the obligation of paying more into that escrow account to make up the difference.
Correct.
Is basically what we're doing is putting an automatic component into this.
Yeah,
That doesn't
what we're
exist.
doing is, the way that the escrow fees are established in code right now, it could be it could be defined as a singular payment. If it's a $2,000 escrow, you pay $2,000, and that's all the developer has to pay, even if the fees are $3,000. So we're trying to put language in there to say, hey, this is something that, there's the purpose of it. If it becomes depleted, the developer's obligated to replenish it.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioners? Any questions, comments? Commissioner LeBron?
One comment. I just really like the use of nexus in 154.11A.
Okay. Got to put 2 words in.
Yeah. Thanks. Commissioners, any other questions? If not, I'll take a motion if we're ready to make one. Commissioner Tyken?
Just a point of clarification, we're just voting on 155, correct?
Correct. We are just voting on 155, and then
Right.
both of them will be handled
Yeah,
down the road.
True. Planning Commission has an option. We've got 2 actions, one for Chapter 154, one for Chapter 155. Commission may combine those into a singular motion, or they may vote on those individually as a recommendation.
I'll move the Planning Commission recommend approval of 155 and 154 as noted in the packets.
Okay, Commissioner Tyken, second.
Second.
Commissioner LeBron, any new discussion? If none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? That motion carries.
Okay? And,
Thanks, John.
Commissioners, same schedule on that one. April 3rd, first reading. April 17th, there'll be a public hearing on the subdivision code, as well as the Chapter 155 final action as well on that. So thank you.
All right, thanks, John. And under actions, we actually just took care of that, or is that separate?
Yes, we took
Okay.
care of that, number 5. So we're
5, okay. We took care of 4 and 5.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, we'll move on to other business.
on other business here. The city council at the last meeting did approve the ordinance for annexation for the Walden and Hastings development. Now, I really should say the Walden and Hastings development. It's the piece of property. There's no obligations granted for any development at this point. But it is a good first step towards what might occur there in the future for development. So that is being recorded at the state, so that'll officially be brought into the city, zoned agriculture at this point. Next steps on that would be for the developer to go through an environmental assessment worksheet, which is going to contemplate environmental impact for various items of the subdivision. Probably a point that a lot of people are interested in is the traffic impact study, which would be part of that. So in communication with the developer to start that in there. Once that environmental assessment worksheet is complete, there'll be actions, I believe, by the Planning Commission as well as the City Council to review that worksheet to see questions that are in it and to declare whether this is sufficient enough or whether more environmental work needs to be done. So there's environmental work that comes into it, and then the particular land use applications that would forward. As far as a time frame on that, I'm unclear at this point. I've posed that question back to the developer at this point, so when I know more information, I'll share it with the group here. So we've got that one going. Other projects go on out there. There's a lot of cranes, a lot of apartment buildings under construction, so that's fun to see here. With the Confluence itself, they're getting close to establishing an opening date there. Have not done that yet, but we've been in conversations with them in the last couple of weeks on final closeout materials related to environmental obligations, liquor licenses, all the operational items they need to really start within there. So I would expect that should be happening here shortly, that there'll be an announcement pertaining to when that will be opening. But in my review of the project and in touring it, they're making very good progress on there. And things are looking more like a restaurant and a convention center and a hotel, which is great to see after all this time. So that project continues. As far as Planning Commission meetings, our next meeting is scheduled for April 10th. Don't have any public hearings scheduled at this point, so we'll stay tuned to see what will happen for that meeting. So that's all I have.
Okay, thanks, John. I did have a couple questions sent to me after the city council, and I didn't know how to answer them, so I thought I'd just answer generically speaking for the annexation. You know how they were tied together? The annexation wasn't gonna happen unless we had a development come forward.
Yes.
We had a development come forward, then the annexation was approved. So as the first developer backed out, right? So if that were to happen again for some reason, the annexation stays though, that's permanent, correct?
Yep,
We are-
annexation stays.
It doesn't matter what happens going forward. that stays city property.
Right.
Right, somebody had asked me that question, or I had a couple people email me, and I said I'd ask, and I wasn't
Yeah.
quite sure how that worked.
Yeah, so what
Because-
happened with the project right now, it's annexed, it will be officially annexed in the coming weeks, once we
Okay.
get the directive from the state. And it becomes in as ag property. So if the developer goes, if this development goes away, it remains as is. It's an agricultural piece of property. If this developer follows through, we review that as it is. If this developer goes away and a new developer comes in here, we do the same thing on that one, make that separate review. But it's kind of a chicken and egg situation when you deal with annexation development. I mean, the council wants to be in the position to have a fairly good understanding of what could come in there, and that there's something that seems fairly certain prior to annexation. And the owner of the property will want to know that too, just because there's certain negative implications if you're annexing property into the city from a property tax standpoint, it remains agriculture.
Thank you. Perfect, thanks. Commissioners, any other business? Anything else? If not, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Commissioner LeBron, second.
Second.
Commissioner McGrath, second. Any new discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?